Hello there, I'm Mark Proctor from exceloffthegrid.com. Thank you for joining me for this session. And in this session, we'll be looking at how we can automate Excel 365 using Power Automate and Office Scripts. We've got a lot to get through in the next few minutes, so let's get started. So the agenda that we'll be following is that we'll start out by looking at what Power Automate and Office Scripts are. Then we'll move on to look at using Office Scripts with Power Automate, and we'll be working through an example with that. And finally, we'll look at how we can expand that example to create reusable scripts so that we can create automations faster. So let's start by answering the question, what are Power Automate and Office Scripts? So Power Automate is a cloud-based tool. It's a low-code, no-code tool, which means that we don't need to have a huge amount of program experience to use it and understand how it works. Now, this tool enables automation through connectors into different applications. So with Power Automate, we can connect into Outlook, we can connect into Gmail, we can connect into MailChimp. There are loads of different connectors that we can use so that we can automate our processes across lots of different applications. Now, Office Scripts, they're a feature of Excel Online, and currently they're only available in Excel Online. And they enable users to write or record scripts so that they can automate Excel workbook-based tasks. They've been labelled as the replacement for VBA macros. However, I don't think Office Scripts are quite there yet. But when we use Power Automate and Office Scripts together, we can achieve some truly amazing things, and some things which would be exceptionally difficult to achieve with VBA macros. So let's head over into Power Automate and we can see what options we have for automating Excel. So here we are in office.com, and as you can see we have all the applications on the left here. Now I've got Power Automate as an application ready. If you haven't, you might need to come down here, click All Apps, and from that you should be able to find Power Automate. Now there are some special licensing around Power Automate, but I won't be covering that today. So if you've not got it, it probably means you haven't got the right kind of license. But to fire up Power Automate, I'll click on the icon. And here we have the tool that is now opened up. There are a number of templates and things in here that we can use. However, they tend to be quite restrictive and only useful if we're doing specific tasks. They're useful for learning from, but we're going to create our own flow in this session. I'll start by clicking Create. And you'll see at the top there that we have a number of triggers. So this determines what will make our flow run. So for example, the first one, Automated Cloud Flow. What this means is that the automation will trigger or start based on a specific event. And that event could be the receiving of an email. That event could be a file being saved in a folder. There's lots of triggers that we can see in there. An instant cloud flow is the next one. This is where we click a button in. It could be in Power Automate, it could be in Power BI, it could be in lots of different applications. We can even have a button that exists on our mobile phones so that we can run the automation from wherever we are. There's the scheduled cloud flow. And this is when the automation runs at a specific time or a specific interval. We won't be looking at all at desktop flows or business process flows. They're outside the scope of what we're looking at today. Actually, we're primarily going to focus on instant cloud flows because they're easiest to demonstrate. They give us a button that we can click and then we can see all the actions that happen from that. So I'll start by clicking that. And it says, what kind of trigger do you want? And we have all these different triggers that we can use. I'm just going to select manually trigger a flow. And the flow we're going to call this is, we'll call it workbook automation. Then I'll click create. So here we have our first flow. And let's just see what options we have for actions that involve Excel. I'll type Excel into the search box. And we have Excel Online for Business and Excel Online OneDrive. The options in there are the same, it just depends what kind of subscription that you have. So looking at these flows here, we have list rows present in a table, update a row, add a key column. There's a few options in there. Let's just demonstrate some of this, shall we? Let's use the Create Worksheet option. Now what I've got over here is a workbook that's called New Workbook. All it has is a single sheet in it, and we're going to use a flow just to add a new worksheet. So back over to our flow. And to start with, it asks me, well, where's our worksheet? So my worksheet is saved in OneDrive for Business, and then OneDrive, and then I can go and select my file. So in Documents, and then I follow through the path to where I've saved it. It's in Presentations, and then Virtually Global. And here we have New Workbook. So I'll select that, and then it asks me, what's the name of the worksheet that I want to create? So I'll just call this New Worksheet. I'll save that flow, and as you can see, we're now ready to go. It says that it recommends that we test it, so let's try that. So there's this test button up here. I'll click test. I'll select a manual action because we're going to click a button. Then I'll click test. So it's recognised that we're using Excel for Business. I'll click continue and then run flow. That flow is now run. I'll click done, and it will show us the steps that have been undertaken. So here is the flow. That's what happened. If I come up here to my new workbook, after a few seconds there you'll see the new worksheet has come in. So it just took a few seconds for that to refresh. So as you can see, using Power Automate, we don't have to use a huge amount of code to run any form of automation. In fact, if we go back to our flow, actually we used no code whatsoever. All we did was select the file and name the worksheet that we wanted to name. So let's just have a look at what other actions we have available. So I'll go into Excel. So I'll search for Excel. I'll scroll down here. So it's tables, rows, get rows, worksheets, run a script, get tables, create tables, delete rows. So where are all the options about creating charts or creating pivot tables or anything like that? Well, that's because Power Automate only really has quite a high level use for Excel. It's actually just using Excel more for its abilities to handle data. Now, while Excel isn't a great database, it is useful for small applications or for holding parameters that we might want to use with an automation. So let me just head back to my slides. Now on this slide, I've grouped all of the different actions together. So there's table actions. There's get tables, create tables, list rows in a table. They're all table-based actions. And there's also worksheet-based actions. As I said, Power Automate is primarily focused on using Excel as a way of storing data. So if we want to do anything that's outside of that, we have to use Office scripts. But thankfully, there is an Excel connector which runs scripts, which means that from Power Automate, we can run a script on our Excel workbook. In this session, I won't be going in depth about how we create and use the Office scripts interface. I recently gave a presentation to the Saudi Arabia Excel and Power Platform meetup group. And so if you want to watch that video, I go into more detail about how we actually use the Office scripts interface. So it might be useful to watch that video after you've been through this session. Okay, so let's move on to our second part. We want to look at how we can use Power Automate and Office scripts together. And we're going to do that with an example. And here's the scenario that we have. So a company has 4 regions: North, East, Central, and Head Office. And each of those is owned by a different region manager. Each day there is a consolidated report that's created which covers all the regions. But we need to create a separate email and a separate report for each region manager. and that email needs to contain their individual report. It needs to be attached to that email. Within that report, we don't share any data, we just show the final summary report. On the right there, you can see the steps that we're going to take. So in Power Automate, we're going to start by clicking a button. We're then going to get all the rows in a parameters file, and we'll look at that in a moment. We'll then copy the consolidated report and create a version for each region. We'll then run a script on each of those region files. And that script will undertake 4 actions. It will change the region name, it will hardcode the value, it will delete all the sheets that are not the report sheet, and then it will return the profit value. And we'll look at all of these in more detail. Then back in Power Automate, we'll get the file contents using the path, and then we'll send the email out to the correct person. Okay, so let's start working through this example. So I'll open up this parameters file, and this parameters file contains the information that we need to automate our script. So if you remember, we had 4 regions: North, South, Central, and Head Office. If we just look at this first row here, so North, that region is looked after by Dave. That's his email address that we need to send the file to. We then have the file path where we want to save the file, and the file name itself. So using these 5 columns, we're able to automate this entire process. The next region is South, and that equally has different parameters, and then Central, and then Head Office. So let's just have a look at our report that we're going to use this on. This is a simple enough report. Here we have our data for that report, and you'll see the regions there. And here's our main report that we're going to send out. Now behind this chart, you'll see there's some calculations. Everything is sum ifs. And then by changing the region name in this cell, what happens is that the chart and the data in the table below will then update. So it'll be North or South, or I could enter an asterisk again, and that will go back to being the consolidated report. Okay, let me just close that daily report. And then I want to make a duplication of that file. So there we go, I've just created an example file that we can then use. So let's click on this example. This means we can do some destructive editing without destroying our original file. So let's look at the steps that we need to follow. So if you remember, the first step was to change the region name. The second step is to hardcode the values. The third step is to delete all the sheets that are not the report sheet. And then the fourth step is to return the profit value. So we're going to look at these one by one. So if you have a Microsoft 365 license with an E3 or E5 license, it should mean that you should have the Automate tab. And this is where we write our scripts. So I've gone to Automate, click All Scripts, and then I'll create a new script. I'll just double click here, and I'll call this Create Report. Delete that code there. So the first step we wanted to take was to change the name of the region. So let's do that. So I've got a comment. So we've got a comment there, change the region name, and now let's write our Office script. And you'll notice that Office scripts are actually quite similar to VBA. So I'm creating a variable here. Let WS report equals workbook dot, and I want to get the worksheet, and the worksheet I want to get is report, because that is the sheet that has the report on it. I'll end that line with a semicolon. Having created my variable, I now want to use it. So ws report dot get range. And this is in cell C2. Hopefully you'll see that the document object model is very similar to how we would use with VBA. So a workbook contains worksheets, worksheets contain ranges, ranges contain values. And actually we're going to use the set value method here. And we're going to call this north. So just as an example, as our first script, when we click the button, what should happen is that it should create, or it should change this cell C2 to the word north. Let's click run. And there we go, it has done. It has filtered our report to just show north. Okay, the next step that we wanted to take was to hard code the values. So step 2. So another comment in Office Scripts. Hard code the values. So we'll create a variable again, and this is a variable that's going to hold all of our values. So worksheet report values, and that's going to equal the WS report. So if you remember, the WS report is our report worksheet, and we're going to get the used range, so the range that contains data or any formatting. And this time we just want to get the values. Having now got the values and stored them in a variable, we now want to change the values that we've currently got on our worksheet. So ws report dot get used range. And having used the get values method, we're now going to use the set values method. And we'll use the WS report values variable that we created in the last step. Okay, we'll click run again. This will be a destructive process because it means that we'll have hard coded the values on our report. I'll click run. And have those values become hard coded? They have. So you can see that there. And now let's move on to step 3. So step 3 was to delete all the sheets that are not the report sheet. So again, another comment. Delete all sheets that are not the report. For this, we're going to use a for each loop. So that means we'll loop through every worksheet within our workbook. First of all, let's just create a variable to hold all of our worksheets. So let worksheet array equals workbook dot get. So before we used get worksheet, we named a single worksheet. This time we're going to use get worksheets. So that will contain all of our worksheets. We can then create our loop to loop through all of those worksheets. So our variable that we created in the line above, WSR dot for each. Now how we create a for each loop is we enter some brackets there. We'll then say that each item is called WS for worksheet, into some curly brackets. We've now created a for each loop. And we want to say that if the workbook name is not report, then we should delete it. So let's enter the code for that. So if, open bracket, ws.getName, so that will get the name of the worksheet. If that does not equal report, then in another set of squiggly brackets, say ws.delete. And they're also in brackets at the end. Let's just close that up a bit. Now let's click run. So there we go. As you saw at the bottom there, we're only now left with the report tab. Finally, step 4, was to return the profit value. So step 4, return profit value. So let profit value equals our WS report again. We want to get the range, which is in cell C12. And we want to get the value or the text that's in there, so I'm going to use get text. And then we want to return the profit value. So what the return does is that it enables us to return a value back into Power Automate. So when we run a script, it means that we can calculate some numbers and return those values back into Power Automate for it to use later on in the process. But there's something else we can do as well. We can also pass parameters from Power Automate into our script. So let's make our script a bit more flexible. So if we look at our parameters file, as you'll notice, there's the region name in that first column. And actually, it's that region name that drives everything. So based on the region, that tells us who the name is, the email address, the file path, and the file name. So let's add a parameter into our function at the top here. We'll call it region, and that will be a string, so a text string. And then rather than the word north, we're going to use whatever parameter is passed to this script. So that means C2 will be set to whatever value we tell it to be in Power Automate. Let's save that script. And now let's head over to Power Automate and we can use it. So I'll start by clicking Create. And let's build a brand new script. Again, from an instant flow, will be a button, and we'll call this Automate Reports. Create. So I'll click New Step. We're going to start by using an Excel connector, Excel step that will list the rows present in a table. And the table we'll use is our parameters table. So this is on my OneDrive for Business, then OneDrive, and the file. Is here in my presentations folder, virtually global. And here we have my daily parameters file. If you remember the parameters file, this is what it looks like. It is a proper Excel table. So it has been formatted as a table and it needs to be formatted as a table for it to work with Power Automate. And the table I want to use is the parameters table. So that's the name that I gave it. So going back to our steps over here, so we've created our button click. We then said for each row in our parameters file, which we've created, we then want to copy the file. So let's type in copy. In OneDrive for Business, we have a copy file option. So I'll select that. And the file we want to use again, for this example, in my same folder. And the file we want to use is the daily report file. I'll select that. Now, where do we want to save this file? Well, that information is actually in our parameters folder. So here we have the file path and the file name. And when we click on here, it brings up this box that gives us the information that we can use in Power Automate. And here we have file path. It's now applied to each, and file name. And I'll say yes, I do want to overwrite any files. So when this automation runs, it'll pick up the file path and the file name from the parameters file. So having created a copy of the file, we then want to use our script. So let's type script. Here's our run script option. First of all, I have to select which file I want to run my script on. It's in OneDrive. And if you remember, we have the file path and file name already in our parameters folder. Can then click script. Now all of our scripts are saved in a consistent location. Let's click on create report. And you'll see that a new line has suddenly appeared called region. And that's the parameter that we set up within our Office script. So which region do we want to use? Well, whichever region it is in our parameters file. We'll then add another action, and this time we want to get the file contents. So get file content using path. So let me just show you that there. So we've run our script, we're now getting the file contents using path. And we know where our file is, because it's the file path and file name from our parameters file. Finally, the final action we want to take is to send the email to the correct person with the correct report attached. So I'm going to put send email. I'm going to send an email using Outlook. You'll notice I haven't got Outlook open at the minute, but that's not a problem. So who is this report being sent to? Well, click here to add dynamic content. Here's the information from our parameters file, and here's the email address. I can select that. What subject do we want to give this? Well, let's call it daily report. For where? Well, we've got our region name again in our parameters file. So by having a parameters file, we can use this information over and over again. Here's the email we're going to send. So hi. And if you look in here, again, so we can use the person's first name. So hi Dave, for example. So hi and the person's name. So for the North region, say hi Dave. Please find attached the daily report for the North, because that will say North for the first line, region. The profit for the day was $. Now, if you remember in our Office script, we returned the profit value, didn't we? And look, this is now available here as a value. So we'll click that, and that should now return the profit value that we had from our individual file. Thanks, Mark. But we're not finished yet. Let's add the attachment. We'll call the attachment daily report, and let's add the region name .xlsx. So that's the attachment name, and then the attachment content is when we got the file using its path. So file content. Right, let's click save. And hopefully our automation is now ready to run. So I'll go to my flows. Here we have automate reports. I'll click run on that. Continue run flow. Done. Now let me click on that to see what's happening. So it started running 5 seconds ago. Click on that. So we can see the steps. We can see it as it's running. I'll just speed this bit up so you don't have to wait. And there we go. After 34 seconds, the flow ran successfully. So let's head over to that email address to see whether we've now received these files. I'll just speed this bit up so you don't have to wait. So there we go. Those emails have now been received. So let's just click on one of those. You can see, hi Dave, So that was from the parameters file. Here's the daily report for the North region. The profit was 59. So we can click on the attachment and it has that file attached, and there you can see the profit for the North region was 59. Equally, Sally for the South region, her profit for the day was 60, and she also gets her own report. And the same will be true for Hope and Javed for the head office and central. So far we've created an office script and used that within Power Automate to automate the sending of reports to a distribution list. But what we did wasn't particularly efficient. Let me introduce you to a concept. This concept is called the Unix Philosophy. So this was created in the early days of computing when the Unix platform was first being developed. Later on, this was summarized down to 3 key points. So when we create programs, we want to write programs that do one thing and do it well. We want to write programs that work together, and we want to write programs that handle text streams because that is a universal interface. So if we think about Power Automate as a tool, it has a number of connectors and number of steps that it goes through. And if we think of that in the light of this Unix philosophy, what we can see is we have Power Automate. That is the journey that happens. And within that, there are other programs that it will then call on that do one thing and one thing well. And those programs work together. So we've already seen that there's programs, as it were, that will copy a file. There's programs that will send emails. And that is the only thing that those steps do. And they do them well. And they all work together using the Power Automate framework as the journey or process to how it achieves this. Now, I don't know whether Power Automate uses all text streams of various kinds, but it doesn't matter. What we've seen so far is that we can use text streams. Now, if we go back to our 4 steps, you can see that we wrote a script that changed a region name, that hard-coded values, that deleted sheets, that returned a profit value. That script only really has one purpose, and that is for the scenario that we gave it. If we tried to use this script for any other purpose, it wouldn't work, would it? But if we think about this Unix philosophy, actually, we could change our one script into 4 scripts. So the first step, change a region name. All we've really done is changed a cell value on a workbook. That's one specific task that we can write a script that it can do well. Hard coding values on a worksheet. Well, that's also one specific task that we could program to do well. Delete sheets that don't meet certain parameters. Well, again, that is a separate script that we could write so that it does that thing well. And fourthly, return the profit value. Well, all we did is return a value from a cell. The fact it was a profit value is almost irrelevant. So that means we could also write a script to do that one thing. So in doing this, what we do is that we use Power Automate to handle variables and parameters. And then using Power Automate, we can have action steps and reusable scripts that we can call over and over again. And eventually that leads us to our result. And our scripts should be reusable. Because if we have a script that all it does is return a value from a cell, well, we can use that on lots of automations. So let's look at how we can do that now. Okay, so back over to Excel. So here I've created an empty script. It's called PA return cell value. The first thing we need to know is what's the name of the worksheet. We don't need to know the name of the workbook because that will be defined within Power Automate. But the name of the worksheet, we definitely need to know. So let's collect a parameter called WSName. And worksheets are all strings, aren't they? Worksheet names. Then we also need to know the cell reference from the value that we want to collect. So let's create another parameter called cell ref. And that's also a string. Okay, now let's create our script. We'll start by listing our script variables. So let's go let worksheet equal the workbook dot get worksheet. Open bracket, and the parameter we're going to use will be the worksheet name, which will come through the parameter that is passed to us from Power Automate. We then want to create a variable that will hold the cell value. So cell value equals, or cell value, and that can be a string or a number. Next, we actually want to get the cell value. So we'll call that cell value equals the worksheet, get range, and the range we want to use is the cell ref that's been passed to it. And then we'll use get text. Finally, we actually want to return the value. So we use return cell value. Okay. So that is how we create a reusable script. I'm missing a letter from there, aren't I? So that is how we create a reusable script. We just need to think about what are the parameters that need to come in from Power Automate. I'll click Save Script. Now going back to our steps. So if you remember, there were the 4 steps that we were going to change into reusable scripts. Unfortunately, I haven't got time to show you how to change all of them into reusable scripts, but let's just have a look at them so you can understand how they are coded. Okay, so let's have a look at these other scripts one by one. So change region name. All we're really doing is changing a cell value. As you look down here, the parameters are worksheet name, so WS name, the cell list, so what cells do we want to change the value for, a value list, so all the values that we want to change, and then a separator. And you can see the purpose there. And then the script there, what it does is that it uses arrays, so it can handle arrays of values to change lots of values all in one go. And as you can see, it's actually quite a small script in itself. The next step we have is to hard code values. So let's have a look at that script. So this one's called copy paste values. And all we really need to know is which worksheets we want to copy and paste the values on. Again, this script is designed to handle multiple worksheets. And then the next one is delete all the sheets that are not in the report. So let's find. So here's our script for this one. And there's 2 things that can happen here. Either we want to delete the sheets that are listed in Power Automate, or we can delete the sheets that are not listed in Power Automate. So we have this method value that you can see there that, depending on whether we say listed or unlisted, determines which worksheets are actually deleted. And then finally, there's the return profit value, and that's the one that we created earlier. Okay, let's head back to Power Automate and let's change our script so that it uses our reusable scripts. So here we are back in Power Automate. The other thing to mention is that now our parameters file actually now needs a lot more values. So it still has region, name, email address, path, but now we need to know what's the report name and what's the region cell and what cell contains the profit value. And we're going to use these in our automation. So let's head back to Power Automate. And we're now going to delete these steps. Right, let's start again. So we've got our trigger. Click New Step. I'll search in Excel we want to list the rows in a table. They're from OneDrive. And the file we want this time is our parameters v2, which has the additional columns on them. Presentations, virtually global, and parameters version 2. And the table we want to use is the table that's on there. Then click New Step. Again, we want to copy our file. So that step hasn't changed. And the file we want to copy is the daily reports file. Daily report. And the same again, our destination will be our file path. Destination will be our file path and our file name. Overwrite yes. To that we want to add another action. So this will now become our first script. And the first script is to change a cell value. So which file do we want to do this on? We want to do it on our file path and file name from our parameters file, and the script we want to run is PA change cell value. And it's going to say, right, what's the worksheet name? Well, we know that because that's in our parameters file. Tab name. What's the cell? The cell reference is our region cell from the parameters file. And what value do we want to change it to? Well, we want to change it to our region name, don't we? Now this script handles a list of tab names, but I put a comma in there as a separator. It won't action anything, but it's just there as a necessary argument. Then I'll add another action. Our next step was to hardcode the values. So let's run another script. My script's in OneDrive for Business, OneDrive again. Again, the same file path and file name that we've used all along. And the script you want to use is called PA copy paste values. If you remember, all it had was one parameter about what worksheet did we want to copy and paste the values on, and we know that from our parameters file. It's our tab name. We'll add another action. That's to run a script again, and this will delete the worksheet. Is the next action we want. So again, we know we want the file path and file name. Select that, and it's PA delete sheets. We should have our parameters appear. It says, right, what method do you want to use? So we want to retain our report tab. So we want to delete everything that's unlisted. So this was a requirement of our script. And the worksheet that we want to keep is our tab name. Okay, let's add another script. This is the script that we created together. So again, OneDrive, the file. So our file path, file name. It was called PA return cell value. And the worksheet that we want to return it from is our report tab, and the cell reference is then the profit cell in our parameters file. So we'll add another action to get the file content using the file path. That's file name, file path. Finally, we'll add the sending of the email again. It's going to go to our email address. The subject will be daily report, same as we used before. The North region. And again, we can use the same message. So, hi, Dave, for the first one. Please find attached the daily report for the North region. The profit for the day was $1 in there. It's the cell value, wasn't it, from when we ran that fourth script. The cell value, that's the value that we want to return. Thanks, Mark. And then let's just add our attachment. So attachment name we call daily report. We can include the region name in that, .xlsx. Attachment, so let's attach the file from there. Right, let's save that script. So that's saving. Right, let's go back to my flows and now let's run it again. Let's take a look to see how it's running. I'll just fast forward through this time so you don't have to wait here with me. There we go, our flow has ran successfully. We can open that up and see all the steps have worked fine. Now you will notice that it takes about 10 seconds for each script to run. So each time we interact between Power Automate and Excel, there is some overhead there. It's about 10 seconds, as you can see. But bearing in mind that all of this runs at the click of a button, and actually we don't have to sit here and watch it, we can go and do anything, we can keep working. So really, is it a problem if it takes a little while longer than it would be if it were a macro? So with our script running successfully, let's head over to Google and see whether these files have now been received. And there we go, as you can see, those additional reports have now been received into our inbox. So once again, we've managed to automate this process. So hopefully you found this useful. We've looked at how we can use Power Automate with Excel without using any Office scripts. And actually, when we do that, it's primarily focused around just managing data. We then saw that we can automate a process just using one script. And then we ran Power Automate to use that script. But we also saw that that wasn't particularly reusable. So then we came back and looked at how we can create a reusable script, which we stepped through one example for that, and then used all of those reusable scripts within Power Automate. So hopefully you'll agree that actually this framework of Power Automate and Office scripts working together is a great way of automating lots of tasks. And over time, hopefully we can build up our script libraries, our libraries of reusable scripts that we can use over and over again, which gives us the opportunity to rapidly build new automation processes, because each time we can just call the script that we already have. Well, thank you for joining me for this session. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you next time.